My name is Damon Blackwood. I'm 46 years old, and until 31 hours ago, I was the Director of Integrated Manufacturing Operations at Falcon Industries, managing 3 sprawling production facilities across Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh that generated $3.5 billion in annual revenue for the automotive and aerospace sectors. For 17 years, I designed and maintained the intricate operational framework that kept Falcon's manufacturing ecosystem functioning with machine precision, coordinating everything from robotics calibration schedules to critical partnership protocols with companies like General Motors, Ford, and Boeing that senior leadership barely acknowledged existed. What I never anticipated was CEO Eric Winfield. Deciding that my 17 years of specialized knowledge could be eliminated at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, communicated through a phone conversation that consumed exactly 4 minutes and 38 seconds. Apparently, when you're the sole individual who comprehends how to synchronize 3 geographically distributed factories, 23 Tier 1 suppliers, and 15 major automotive manufacturers, you become simultaneously too valuable to retain and too risky to terminate through proper channels. That fundamental miscalculation was about to drain Falcon Industries of more capital than Eric Winfield had generated throughout his entire executive tenure. The conversation that terminated my career occurred while I sat in my home workshop analyzing quality control metrics for a critical Boeing turbine component order scheduled for shipment by 5:30 a.m. This wasn't extraordinary. Automotive and aerospace, manufacturing functions on microscopic tolerances and inflexible deadlines, particularly when a production line stoppage costs clients $800,000 per hour. The person ensuring those clocks never started ticking for 17 years had been me. Damon, this is Eric Winfield. I'm calling to inform you about an immediate structural reorganization affecting your current role. Eric Winfield's voice carried that distinctive inflection. Executives employ when delivering prepared termination scripts. I'd witnessed it during the biannual workforce reductions that had become standard practice under his administration. What type of reorganization are we discussing? I asked, already running probability calculations while monitoring live production telemetry flowing across my dual monitor setup. Your position as Director of Integrated Manufacturing Operations is being dissolved, effective immediately. We're consolidating operational supervision under our new Chief Technology Officer, who provides an algorithm-based methodology to production oversight. Algorithm-based methodology, executive terminology for we recruited someone less expensive who lacks fundamental understanding of operational mechanics. Eric, I'm currently overseeing an active robotics synchronization issue and a time-critical shipping window. Could this discussion be postponed until standard operating hours? I'm afraid that's not feasible. The decision has received board approval and requires immediate implementation for organizational efficiency. Optimization, organizational efficiency. Optimization at 11:47 p.m. while supervising. Production systems that couldn't tolerate interruption. My chief executive just terminated my employment in the middle of managing an active manufacturing crisis because it optimized organizational efficiency. Eric, who's assuming operational control for the current production cycle. There are critical decisions required within the next 3 hours. Jonathan Hayes, our new Chief Technology Officer, will absorb responsibility for all manufacturing functions. He possesses extensive background in industrial automation and predictive analytics. Jonathan Hayes. I'd never encountered that name, which indicated he'd been recruited. Without consultation from the individual who actually comprehended Falcon's operational architecture. Has Jonathan received briefing on tonight's delivery schedules and equipment synchronization protocols? He'll obtain comprehensive transition materials and will interface with factory supervisors as necessary. Transition materials for operations requiring instantaneous decisions, grounded in 17 years of institutional understanding about supplier idiosyncrasies, equipment constraints, and client-specific requirements. Eric, Falcon's manufacturing operations aren't transferable through documentation. There are supplier dynamics, equipment behaviors, timing interdependencies that, Damon, I value your commitment, but we maintain confidence in our succession strategy. Jonathan contributes innovative perspective to operational obstacles that may have become overly complicated under existing management frameworks. Existing management frameworks that referenced me, the former naval engineering officer who elevated Falcon's operational efficiency from 72% to 96% across 17 years, preventing approximately $630 million in waste and production delays. When does this transition become active? Immediately. We require you to terminate all operational involvement and transfer system access. Credentials to Jonathan by 1:15 a.m. Terminate operational involvement while 3 factories valued at $3.5 billion operated overnight shifts with multiple concurrent complications demanding continuous coordination. Eric, halting operational supervision during active production runs could generate substantial complications, equipment malfunctions, shipping failures, worker safety concerns. Jonathan is thoroughly prepared to manage any operational scenarios. We wouldn't execute this change if we lacked confidence in the technological transition. Examined my monitors displaying real-time information. From Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh facilities, equipment diagnostics, supplier coordination flags, quality assurance alerts, timing modifications, hundreds of decisions requiring someone who understood how all components interconnected. Understood, I responded finally. Do you need me to orient Jonathan on current operational status? That won't be required. He prefers evaluating situations autonomously, rather than adopting previous management paradigms. Like knowing which suppliers demanded specialized coordination for Midwest weather patterns, which equipment required careful monitoring during temperature fluctuations, and which clients maintained zero tolerance for delivery discrepancies. I'll complete the access credential transfer within the hour. Excellent. Human Resources will contact you tomorrow regarding transition documentation and final administrative procedures. The line disconnected at 11:51 p.m., 4 minutes and 38 seconds to eliminate 17 years of operational expertise while managing an active manufacturing crisis. The access transfer process felt surreal. At 12:52 a.m., I began methodically transferring system credentials for platforms I'd constructed, refined, and monitored for over a decade. Production, oversight, dashboards, supplier coordination networks, equipment diagnostic frameworks, quality verification protocols. Transferring each system resembled surrendering the controls to an aircraft while someone else was already attempting to fly it. At 1:34 a.m., my phone illuminated, unknown caller, but I recognized the Falcon Exchange. Mr. Blackwood, this is Jonathan Hayes. I understand you've been managing overnight operations. I wanted to introduce myself and obtain a brief status update on current activities. Jonathan Hayes sounded younger than I'd anticipated, with the assured tone of someone who'd probably supervised manufacturing operations previously, but had never encountered Falcon's particular complexities. Hello, Jonathan. I've transferred all system access credentials as requested. You should possess complete operational authority now. Perfect. Could you provide a quick overview of tonight's situation? Any immediate concerns I should prioritize? I observed the monitors. I no longer possessed authorization to access. You'll need to examine the production dashboards for current status. I'm no longer participating in operational decisions, certainly, but just for orientation purposes. Are there critical issues I should address first? The question revealed precisely what I'd suspected. Jonathan had received responsibility for operations he didn't comprehend without preparation for the specific challenges he was inheriting. Jonathan, I'd recommend reviewing current production schedules, verifying supplier delivery status, and monitoring equipment alerts. The Detroit facility was experiencing robotics. Timing calibration issues with the Boeing turbine order. Cleveland had an aluminum alloy delivery coordination flag affecting tomorrow's General Motors shipment. Pittsburgh was managing a thermal treatment cycle, synchronization that impacts next week's Ford transmission components. Okay, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Boeing, GM, Ford. Understood. Anything else I should monitor? Anything else? 17 years of operational intelligence compressed into anything else. You'll want to observe the overnight shift coordinators. They manage routine decisions, but escalation procedures require operational supervision for non-standard circumstances. Excellent. And if questions arise, can I contact you tonight? I paused, considering Eric Winfield's 11:47 p.m. phone call and his confidence that Jonathan could handle operational scenarios autonomously. Jonathan, I'm no longer employed by Falcon as of 3 hours ago. You'll need to coordinate with factory supervisors and shift coordinators for operational support. The silence extended long enough for me to question if the connection had failed. You're no longer employed as of tonight? I assumed I was assuming control from you tomorrow morning. You assumed control at 1:15 a.m. when I transferred system access credentials. Another pause. Mr. Blackwood, I believe there may have been communication breakdown. I wasn't expecting to commence tonight. I haven't reviewed current operations or received briefing on ongoing complications. And there it was. Eric Winfield had terminated the individual managing active operations and transferred responsibility to someone who hadn't been prepared to assume control during overnight production runs that couldn't afford disruption. Jonathan, I'd recommend contacting Eric Winfield or Human Resources to clarify your responsibilities and timeline. I'm not positioned to provide operational guidance. Right, understood. Thank you for the information. After disconnecting, I sat in my darkened workshop, observing the cityscape through my window and contemplating the production facilities now operating without the supervision they'd depended on for 17 years. 3 factories worth $3.5 billion, managing complex operations with stringent deadlines and zero margin for error, now under the supervision of someone who hadn't anticipated managing them until tomorrow. Eric Winfield had desired immediate organizational efficiency optimization. He was about to receive an extremely expensive education in the distinction between administrative convenience and operational reality. My phone began vibrating with notifications from factory coordinators seeking operational guidance, messages I was no longer authorized to respond to for operations. I was no longer responsible for managing. I powered down my phone and retired for the evening. Whatever transpired next was Jonathan Hayes's responsibility now. The initial crisis materialized at 7:53 a.m. I know this because my personal phone started receiving calls from factory coordinators who possessed my direct number for emergencies, but apparently couldn't reach Jonathan Hayes for operational decisions. I didn't answer any of them. By 9:15 a.m., I had 17 missed calls and 26 text messages from various Falcon employees, ranging from shift coordinators requesting guidance to factory managers seeking clarification on equipment protocols. All inquiries that should have been directed to Jonathan Hayes, but apparently weren't receiving responses. At 11:03 a.m., Eric Winfield called my personal phone. Damon, we're experiencing some operational complications that require your immediate assistance. Good morning, Eric. I'm no longer employed by Falcon. As of 11:47 p.m. yesterday, you'll need to coordinate operational support through Jonathan Hayes. Jonathan is encountering some difficulty getting acclimated. We need you to report in and assist with the transition. Difficulty getting acclimated. 9 hours after assuming responsibility for $3.5 billion worth of production operations. Eric, you terminated my employment for organizational efficiency reasons. I'm not available for transition assistance. This is temporary consultation work. We're prepared to compensate emergency consulting rates. Emergency consulting rates for resolving problems created by terminating me while managing active operations. I'm not available for consulting work. I'm pursuing other opportunities. Other opportunities, yes. It appears that operational expertise is in significant demand when it becomes suddenly available. What I didn't mention was that my phone had been receiving calls since 6:45 a.m. from Falcon's competitors, all of whom had learned through industry networks that I was no longer with the company. Automotive and aerospace manufacturing is a tight-knit community, and information travels rapidly when someone with my track record becomes available. Damon, we need to discuss this situation. Can you come in this morning? I don't believe that would be appropriate. Jonathan Hayes is thoroughly prepared to handle operational scenarios, according to yesterday's conversation. The situation has become more complicated than anticipated. Translation. Everything was deteriorating without the individual who understood how it actually functioned. I'm confident Jonathan will resolve it. He contributes innovative perspective to operational obstacles. Remember? Damon, please. We're willing to discuss reinstatement with enhanced terms. Reinstatement after terminating me at 11:47 p.m. for organizational efficiency. Optimization. Eric, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in returning to a position that can be eliminated on 4 minutes. Notice for administrative convenience. What would it require? I observed my kitchen window overlooking the morning traffic, contemplating. The 17 years I'd invested building operational systems that Eric Winfield had just discovered he couldn't function without. It would require a time machine, Eric. You can't eliminate institutional knowledge and then expect to lease it back when you realize you need it. When I disconnected, I experienced something I hadn't felt since leaving the Navy, complete control over my professional trajectory. They terminated me to streamline operations through algorithmic methodology. And now they were discovering that some operations can't be algorithmically optimized without the expertise that makes them function. The comprehensive collapse of Falcon's operations required exactly 26 hours. The first domino toppled at 8:31 a.m. when the Detroit facility's primary robotics assembly line shut down due to what Jonathan Hayes later characterized as unexpected synchronization coordination issues. In operational terminology, this meant Jonathan hadn't understood the preventive calibration protocols I developed for coordinating robotic welding sequences with aluminum delivery timing. When the morning aluminum shipment arrived 37 minutes early, Jonathan had approved immediate processing without realizing the robotics required specific temperature. Equilibration time. The result was a mechanical malfunction that cascaded through the entire assembly line and triggered automatic safety protocols. What should have been straightforward supplier coordination became a 7-hour shutdown that delayed the Boeing delivery and cost approximately $215,000 in missed production targets. I learned about this not from panicked phone calls, but from LinkedIn messages from former colleagues expressing disbelief that communication failures were occurring so rapidly after my departure. The second domino fell at 5:07 p.m. when the Cleveland facility experienced what industry professionals call systemic cascade failure. Jonathan had attempted to compensate for Detroit's delays by accelerating Cleveland's production schedule without understanding that Cleveland's operations were specifically calibrated to support Detroit's timing requirements. The Cleveland facility didn't just manufacture components, it provided specialized aluminum assemblies that Detroit required for their robotics equipment. When Jonathan ordered Cleveland to prioritize independent deliveries over supporting Detroit, he unknowingly severed the coordination that kept both facilities synchronized. The result was Cleveland producing components that Detroit couldn't utilize, while Detroit waited for components that Cleveland wasn't manufacturing. By 7:30 p.m., both facilities were operating at less than 30% capacity with production schedules that no longer aligned with delivery commitments to Boeing and General Motors. But the knockout punch came from Pittsburgh. At 8:42 p.m., the Pittsburgh facility experienced what the incident report later described as catastrophic thermal treatment protocol failure. Jonathan had attempted to independently optimize Pittsburgh's thermal cycle, scheduling without comprehending that Pittsburgh's operations were synchronized with both Detroit and Cleveland's production rhythms. The thermal treatment processes weren't just local operations. They were precisely timed to receive components from Detroit and Cleveland at specific intervals that matched the thermal cycle requirements. When Jonathan modified Pittsburgh's scheduling to compensate for the other facilities' disruptions, he created a timing mismatch that resulted in an entire batch of Ford transmission components being heat-treated incorrectly. The result was $700,000 in scrapped materials and a complete shutdown of Pittsburgh's thermal treatment operations pending safety inspections. I learned about the full scope of the crisis from an unexpected source. My former deputy, William Carter, who called my personal phone at 9:18. Bam. Damon, I probably shouldn't be calling you, but the situation here is completely out of control. Jonathan has been in emergency meetings all day, and nobody knows how to repair what's happening, what exactly is happening. All three facilities are essentially paralyzed. Detroit can't complete the Boeing order. Cleveland scrapped an entire production run. Pittsburgh destroyed $500,000 in transmission components, and the factory managers are requesting guidance, but Jonathan keeps saying he needs time to analyze the algorithmic patterns. Analyze the algorithmic patterns while $3.5 billion worth of production. Infrastructure sat idle because the individual who understood the patterns had been eliminated for organizational efficiency, optimization. Has anyone contacted the clients about delivery delays? That's the worst part. Jonathan says we should wait until tomorrow to determine if the situation stabilizes before notifying clients. But Damon, we're talking about Boeing, GM, and Ford. These aren't companies that accept surprise delays. No, they weren't. Automotive and aerospace manufacturers operate on just-in-time delivery schedules with zero tolerance for supplier failures. Missing delivery commitments didn't just cost money, it damaged relationships that had taken years to construct. William, I appreciate you calling, but I'm not in a position to provide guidance anymore. I know, it's just everyone's asking what you would do in this situation. What I would do was precisely what I'd been doing for 17 years. Coordinate between facilities, communicate with suppliers, manage client expectations, and maintain the operational rhythm that kept everything synchronized. But Eric Winfield had decided that coordination was too expensive to maintain. William, the situation will resolve itself one way or another. Jonathan has the authority and responsibility to make operational decisions now. But what if he can't repair it? That was the question. Eric Winfield should have asked before eliminating the individual who understood how to prevent these problems in the first place. The industry reaction began appearing in trade publications by Friday morning. Falcon Industries experiences multi-facility production disruptions ran in automotive manufacturing. Today, followed by more detailed analyses in aerospace production quarterly. The articles were diplomatically worded, but the message was clear. Falcon was experiencing operational failures affecting major automotive and aerospace clients. By Friday afternoon, the financial impact was becoming visible. Falcon stock had dropped 11% on investor concerns about production reliability, while competitors' shares rose on speculation that Falcon's problems would drive business elsewhere. But the devastating blow came from the clients themselves. Boeing issued a formal notice of supplier sue. Review: citing reliability concerns in manufacturing operations. General Motors implemented emergency contingency, planning to source critical components from alternative suppliers. Ford sent what amounted to warning correspondence about the importance of delivery schedule. Adherence. In 8 days, Jonathan Hayes had managed to damage relationships that had taken 17 years to build. The call I'd been anticipating came the following Wednesday afternoon, not from Eric Winfield this time, but from Falcon's board of directors, represented by Chairman Robert Sullivan. Mr. Blackwood, I'm calling to discuss a potential consulting engagement that would help Falcon address some operational challenges we're experiencing. Consulting engagement, corporate speak for please repair the disaster we created by terminating you. What kind of challenges are you experiencing? Multi-facility coordination, issues that have affected production, efficiency, and client delivery schedules. The board believes your expertise could help resolve these complications. 8 days of production, failures that had cost millions in lost revenue and damaged relationships with major automotive and aerospace manufacturers. Mr. Sullivan, what specifically is Falcon looking for in this consulting arrangement? Immediate operational assessment and recommendations for stabilizing production. Across all 3 facilities, we're prepared to offer premium consulting rates for expedited service. Premium consulting rates for repairing problems that wouldn't have existed if they hadn't eliminated the individual who prevented them. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not available for consulting work. Not available? Mr. Blackwood, we're talking about significant compensation for helping resolve a temporary situation. I'm not available because I've accepted a position elsewhere. Horizon Manufacturing Systems offered me a role as Executive Vice President of Operations with responsibility for building their new automotive and aerospace supply division. The silence on the other end told me everything. Horizon Manufacturing was Falcon's largest competitor, and they'd just recruited the individual who understood Falcon's operational vulnerabilities better than anyone. Mr. Blackwood, surely we can discuss terms that would be competitive with any other offer. Mr. Sullivan, 8 days ago, Falcon terminated me at 11:47 p.m. for organizational efficiency optimization. Today, you're offering premium rates to repair the problems that decision created. What's changed isn't my availability. It's your understanding of what operational expertise is actually worth. What would it take to bring you back? I observed my apartment window overlooking the Detroit skyline, contemplating the 17 years I'd invested building systems that Eric Winfield had destroyed in a single midnight phone call. It would take competent leadership that understands the distinction between reducing costs and reducing capabilities. Horizon Manufacturing offers that. Falcon apparently doesn't. The final chapter unfolded over the following months. Unable to restore coordination between their facilities, Falcon was forced to recruit emergency consulting teams at costs that exceeded my annual salary within 4 weeks. The consultants were competent but expensive, and more importantly, they were temporary. Every solution they implemented required ongoing maintenance and optimization that Falcon no longer had the internal expertise to provide. Meanwhile, Horizon Manufacturing was constructing exactly the kind of operation I'd always envisioned. Proper coordination between facilities, comprehensive supplier relationships, and leadership that understood operational excellence required ongoing investment in the individuals who created it. My first day at Horizon was a revelation. CEO Clara Preston walked me through their facilities personally, asking detailed questions about equipment, protocols, and supplier relationships. She understood that operations weren't overhead to be minimized, but competitive advantage to be maximized. Damon, she said as we reviewed their expansion plans, we recruited you because you understand something most executives don't: operations. Expertise isn't a cost center, it's profit generation. Every day your systems run smoothly is another day we're defeating competitors who don't comprehend it. That conversation never would have occurred at Falcon. 7 months later, Horizon won the contract to supply Boeing's new composite fuselage expansion project, a $1.6 billion deal that Falcon had been favored to win before their operational reliability came into question. I was in the room, when Boeing's procurement director explained their decision. Horizon demonstrated operational stability and institutional knowledge that we require for this scale of project. Recent industry developments have made us more selective about supplier reliability. Recent industry developments. He was discussing Falcon's collapse without mentioning them by name. I received a final contact from Falcon 10 months after my termination. Eric Winfield, calling from what sounded like a considerably smaller office, requesting a meeting to discuss lessons learned and potential future collaboration. I declined politely. Some lessons are too expensive to teach twice. The vindication materialized in multiple forms over the next year. Horizon's operations under my leadership became the benchmark for efficiency that other companies studied. We implemented coordination systems that I'd always wanted to trial at Falcon, but never had the budget authorization for. The result was 98% operational efficiency across 4 new facilities, generating $5.4 billion in annual revenue. Automotive Engineering Journal featured our success story in a cover article titled Operations Mastery: How Institutional Knowledge Drives Competitive Advantage. The case study specifically contrasted Horizon's approach with companies that had eliminated operational expertise for short-term cost reduction. Industry conferences started inviting me as a keynote speaker. The Manufacturing Excellence Summit asked me to present on building sustainable operations in complex industries. My presentation drew the largest audience of the conference, filled with executives who wanted to understand how to value and retain operational expertise. During the Q&A session, someone asked about companies that eliminate experienced operations, directors for cost reduction. I gave them the honest answer. You can't algorithmically optimize institutional knowledge. You can document processes, but you can't replicate the judgment that comes from 17 years of solving problems that don't appear in any manual. When you eliminate that expertise, you're not streamlining operations. You're gambling with your entire enterprise. The business school case study emerged 19 months later. Stanford Business School contacted me about teaching a case study based on Falcon's operational collapse. The case, titled The Midnight Termination: How Operational Expertise Became Competitive Advantage, became required reading. In several MBA programs focusing on manufacturing management, students would analyze the decision-making process that led to eliminating operational supervision during active production runs, then study how Horizon Manufacturing capitalized on their competitors' mistakes. The lesson was clear. Operational expertise isn't overhead. It's the foundation that everything else depends on. The industry gossip network kept me informed about Falcon's continuing struggles. Jonathan Hayes lasted exactly 4 months before resigning under pressure, citing irreconcilable differences with board expectations. His replacement, a veteran manufacturing executive named Thomas Fletcher, spent his first 6 months simply trying to understand the coordination systems I'd built, and then abandoned. Thomas actually reached out to me 3 months into his tenure, not requesting consultation, but simply asking if I'd be willing to answer some questions about supplier relationships and equipment protocols. I appreciated his honesty and spent 2 hours on the phone explaining some of the fundamental coordination principles that Falcon had lost when they terminated me. Unfortunately for Thomas and for Falcon, understanding the principles wasn't the same as possessing the relationships. The suppliers I'd worked with for 17 years had developed trust in my judgment and reliability. They knew I understood their constraints and would work with them to solve problems rather than simply demanding compliance. That trust had taken years to build and couldn't be transferred through documentation or phone conversations. Within 6 months of my departure, 3 of Falcon's Tier 1 suppliers had quietly begun exploring relationships with Horizon Manufacturing, not because I solicited them, but because they'd watched Falcon's operational chaos and recognized that reliable partnerships required stable operations. When Precision Alloys Corporation, Falcon's primary aluminum supplier for 14 years, announced they were expanding their partnership with Horizon Manufacturing, the industry understood the implications. Suppliers don't abandon long-term relationships casually. They do it when they lose confidence in their partner's ability to manage complex operations. 2 years after my termination, Falcon Industrial Systems was acquired by a German manufacturing conglomerate for 42% below their peak valuation. Industry analysts specifically cited operational instability and loss of institutional knowledge as key factors that had weakened the company's market position. The acquisition announcement included a telling detail. The new owner's first priority was rebuilding operational expertise and supplier relationships that had been compromised during recent organizational transitions. Organizational transitions. That was corporate speak for Eric Winfield's 11:47 p.m. phone call. Meanwhile, Horizon Manufacturing had become the dominant automotive and aerospace supplier in the Great Lakes region. When Horizon went public, 33 months after I joined, my stock options were worth $4.1 million. More importantly, we'd created a sustainable operation that could grow without sacrificing reliability. The financial windfall was gratifying, but what truly mattered was building something that would last. At Horizon, we weren't just documenting processes. We were developing the next generation of operations leaders who understood that manufacturing excellence required both technical knowledge and institutional wisdom. I implemented a comprehensive mentorship program where senior operations managers worked directly with junior staff, not just teaching procedures, but explaining the reasoning behind decisions. When a supplier delivery was delayed, we didn't just execute the contingency plan. We explained why that particular supplier required different coordination than others and how to recognize patterns that indicated potential problems before they became critical. This approach created redundancy in expertise rather than creating single points of failure. If I was unexpectedly unavailable, there were 3 other senior managers who understood the coordination principles well enough to maintain operations without disruption. That was the opposite of what I'd inadvertently created at Falcon, where 17 years of knowledge resided primarily in one person. Eric Winfield never recovered professionally. After Falcon's acquisition, he spent 18 months in consulting before accepting a significantly reduced role at a mid-tier automotive parts manufacturer. Industry colleagues later told me he'd become obsessed with operational documentation and knowledge retention. Lessons learned too late. I encountered him once, unexpectedly, at an industry conference in Chicago, 28 months after my termination. He approached me during a networking reception, looking older and noticeably less confident than the executive who terminated my employment at 11:47 p.m. Damon, he said quietly. I've wanted to reach out for some time. I owe you an apology for how your departure was handled. I appreciated the gesture, though it didn't change what had happened. Eric, I understand business decisions need to be made. What I never understood was the timing and the lack of transition planning. He nodded slowly. I made a mistake. The board was pushing for immediate cost reductions, and I thought technology could replace experience. I didn't understand what you actually did until it was too late. That was perhaps the most honest thing Eric Winfield had ever said to me. He hadn't understood what I actually did. Most executives don't. They see operations as a function rather than an ecosystem, as a cost line rather than the foundation that enables everything else. I appreciate you saying that, Eric. For what it's worth, I hope your current role is treating you well. We shook hands and parted ways. There was no satisfaction in his professional struggles. He'd made a decision based on incomplete understanding, and he'd paid the price. So had Falcon, and so had the hundreds of employees whose jobs were affected by the operational collapse. I kept one memento from my Falcon years, the final quarterly report showing record operational efficiency numbers, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that expertise isn't overhead, it's the foundation that everything else depends on. The report sat on my office bookshelf at Horizon, visible whenever I met with young operations managers who were frustrated that executives didn't understand their value. I'd point to that report and tell them the why story, not to encourage bitterness, but to help them understand that operational excellence creates its own opportunities. Today, I'm still at Horizon, manufacturing as Executive Vice President of Operations, overseeing 5 facilities that generate $7.3 billion in annual revenue. We've secured my children's education funds and built the kind of operational excellence that becomes industry standard rather than industry cautionary tale. My daughter Emily, now studying mechanical engineering at MIT, sometimes asks about my career transition. She wants to understand how I went from being terminated at midnight to building one of the most successful operations divisions in the industry. I tell her the same thing I tell the operations managers. I mentor. Expertise has value that extends beyond any single employer. When you build real knowledge, when you develop genuine expertise, you're not just making yourself valuable to one company, you're creating portable value. That follows you wherever you go. But I also tell her the harder lesson. Sometimes leadership doesn't recognize value until it's gone. That's not a reason to become bitter or to undervalue your own expertise. It's a reason to find leadership that understands what you bring to the table. Sometimes the most expensive business education comes from learning the difference between having operations and understanding them. Eric taught me that expertise can't be eliminated and then leased back when convenient. Clara, at Horizon, taught me that the right leadership recognizes operational knowledge as strategic advantage rather than algorithmic overhead. They terminated me to streamline operations through technological optimization. Instead, they discovered that some operations require expertise to understand them, and some expertise can't be replaced with algorithms and innovative perspectives. The education cost them $3.5 billion in operational capability, but it was priceless. For everyone who learned that eliminating operational expertise doesn't optimize anything. It just ensures that someone else will profit from the opportunities you can no longer manage. The foundation I built at Horizon will outlast the executives who understand its value because we documented not just the processes, but the reasoning behind them. More importantly, we built a culture where that reasoning is continuously developed and passed forward to the next generation of operations leaders. That's the difference between institutional knowledge and algorithmic optimization. One builds on experience and evolves through wisdom. The other hopes to replace it with data patterns and predictive analytics. Falcon thought they were reducing overhead. Instead, they eliminated their competitive foundation and handed the blueprint to their biggest competitor. I didn't just walk away from Falcon that night. I walked away with 17 years of knowledge about what works, what doesn't, and why. That knowledge became the seed that grew into Horizon's operational excellence. Eric Winfield made his 11:47 p.m. phone call, expecting to save money through organizational efficiency. What he actually did was hand his biggest competitor the exact expertise they needed to dominate the market. Some lessons are simple. You can't eliminate expertise and expect the operations to continue. You can't replace 17 years of institutional knowledge with 4 minutes of administrative efficiency. And you can't fire the person who understands how everything works and then act surprised when everything stops working. The most satisfying part isn't the financial success or the industry recognition. It's knowing that every day, Horizon's operations run smoothly because we built them on a foundation of expertise, respect, and continuous learning. Meanwhile, Falcon's facilities still struggle with coordination issues that I could solve in my sleep. That's not arrogance. It's simply the reality of what happens when you eliminate the person who built the system and then wonder why nobody else knows how to maintain it. They thought they were cutting overhead. Instead, they cut their own future and handed the knife to their biggest competitor. And I walked away with exactly what I'd built, 17 years of expertise that no midnight phone call could eliminate.